Okay, should be good. Says we're going live.
All right.
So, welcome.
Yeah, here we are.
Here we are. You can see
We're
our
the Wax Lab
faces.
guys. I shaved for this occasion.
Oh,
I felt like we couldn't both have the same amount of facial hair. Uh, anyways, yep. Many of you may know us. Many of you more, I hope, in the future won't know us, but will come to know us. I'm Jonathan Kerf, and you are.
I'm Jonathan, Death and Strawberries.
I spell mine with an H, and he does not. Anyways, so yeah, we wanted to introduce ourselves, why we're doing this, and ultimately kind of share what we hope you learn from what we share. And it's going to be about wax, of course, sculpting wax, toy wax, and clay, and the ways of working with it. Yeah, I got into this at the beginning, the summer of 2020, when everyone picked up a hobby, and found my way to wax through watching a video of Scott Hensey sharing his process and his recipe on all the TMNT sculpts that he did back in the day. And then I found my way to the Star Wars Collector's Archive, where there's just tons of photos of the original wax sculpts of many of the Star Wars action figures. And have even had the pleasure of talking with some of the sculptors from back then, and just learning about the process there at Kenner. And that was really the kind of the start of my own project on the #2 action figure from the movie Prospect. And so really since then I've preferred working in wax, and here I am today.
Same, basically. I definitely Scott Hensey was a big influence on getting into wax, and then at the same time as I was discovering the Star Wars archive, that's what I was watching Kerf on Instagram and a bunch of his live videos, and it was just like oh my gosh, this is how you do it. This is how you get the clean, smooth, polished type of sculpts that I was looking to get. And so I dove in real hard, and we've both been working together trying to kind of piece together the archaeology of like what was used back in the day. Obviously it's not widely used today, sculpting wax. I mean, a lot of modern things are sculpted digitally. It's easier to move those things around in the ones and zeros, but I think there's still something about that, like tactile stuff is done by hand, it's done by a person, it has a little bit of feel and sort of a style that I think it seems like it's difficult to replicate otherwise. So it's super interesting to me. But yeah, so we're going to talk a lot more about all the stuff that we're working on and where we're going and things that we're learning along the way here. But basically we're going to start doing some sculpting on screen here and chit-chatting along the way, and hopefully you guys can join along. If you're on live right now, the live chat is open, and so we're trying to be responsive to you there. So
Yeah, do you have that chat out?
I do. So yeah,
okay.
So let us know if you got any questions or anything, and we'll try and, like I said, be responsive to that. Otherwise, please you can leave a comment in the comment section, and we'll be checking that as well. So
yeah. So yeah, wax. Gosh, where do we start? Like, this. I wonder if maybe can you think of some like misconceptions about wax that we had in the beginning, that you think would be good to answer right off the bat?
For sure. I think the biggest one is like cost to entry. That, I think a misconception is like, well, and I can't find wax anywhere. Two, it's really expensive. The tools are expensive. You got to get all these fancy different, sculpting tools and stuff. And that's just not true at all. I think the most expensive thing would be the wax pen, which I can switch my camera here and you can see one version of one. So this guy here would be the wax pen. So this heats up. It's got a rheostat. Also, I was just reminding Kerf about this, but there's a Toys on Tap episode that just aired recently with Stephen Geddes, who was a sculptor at Kenner back in the 70s, and he talks about this specific type of waxer, wax pen. So Kerf has a much newer, smaller, fancier version, but this is kind of the old school deal. This one came from Dave Evans, who worked at another studio later on and has done all kinds of toy sculpting as well. But anyway, there's waxer, so you got different tips. You want to talk about tips?
Well, I'd almost want to go back just a step before things got electric, and even before the whole notion of sculpting in wax is something that even predates action figures. It was a method, and is a method used still today to sculpt jewelry, and then they make their molds for the, I guess that's investment casting or something like that. And they melt out the wax from that, even before things got to the electric pens, there's also the alcohol lamps. So like a denatured alcohol in a little lamp like this, and you can heat the tool over the flame, and it's using denatured alcohol, so you're not getting the soot onto your tool and then transferring that into the wax sculpt. But this is how I started out before I got the electric pen. This is like $14. The denatured alcohol for a quart of that is maybe another $5. So really reasonable to get started. And then a set of dental sculpting tools, that's another 12. Tools and such, it's a fairly low entry point. You might pay about the same for a set of clay sculpting tools, should you go into that direction. But definitely the heating of your metal tools is how you melt the wax to then add it on to the sculpt you're working on. Without that, there's no way to blend it with your fingers. I think maybe another kind of big question about the wax that we use is it's nothing like candle wax. There are several ingredients in the wax recipe that increase its hardness, its melting point, its kind of resistance to carving. It includes talc, beeswax, paraffin, candelilla, and carnauba. In some varieties, will include other kinds of either substitutes to talc or microcrystalline wax. And the different proportions of those things all change the quality for the sculptor. And what we've learned in our own research is that the big toy studios would have their own recipes that would even evolve over time as well. But we've dove deep into that and tried to hone in a recipe that we think is similar to some of the things we've tried, just as a baseline. But it's certainly a wonderful experiment.
Yeah, and I think we'll get deeper into some tools as we go. I just wanted to highlight the fact that it's not necessary to spend thousands of dollars just to get started.
Right.
and there are some commercially available waxes such as Asbro that's out there you can buy right now. And you know, it depends on how
Yeah,
you want to use it, right?
yeah,
So there's a couple different uses, and we can go over that stuff as we go too.
yeah.
But yeah,
Another good tool, and I'd say another uh, thing. What may not be obvious to many who are just learning about this is that in most cases, wax is not the first medium that you start the sculpt in. Um, uh,
no,
in to understand proportions, and then to make molds of that clay rough and cast wax into it. And so a helpful tool for that is something like this Presto pot. That's about $35 on Amazon, and it's an electric cooking pot, but it's got a nice dial control on it. And right now I have some Asbro wax that's melting in there, and we'll do an example of injecting that into a plaster mold. The kinds of molds that you can cast into with wax could be plaster, could be silicone, but I think anything that's susceptible to temperatures around 170, 100, maybe even 150, 100 to 200 degrees Fahrenheit would be, you have to watch out for that. But plaster and silicone stand up to that pretty well. Yeah, John, what's your experience been with casting wax?
Yeah, it's so it kind of depends on which wax you're using. So we've tested multiple recipes, and some of the recipes that have a little bit more carnauba in them are a little bit more difficult to cast with. But I would say any of the stuff that you're buying off the counter, like Asbro or something like that, or if you can get your hands on some vintage wax, I haven't had any issues with it. Takes a little bit to know like what temperature you're pouring at, and you do have to take into consideration it will cool as you're pouring. So you may want to have the temperature just a little higher before you start pouring, because it needs to be the right temperature as it's filling the mold. Your mold also, if it's cold, will cool the wax, and that can cause those chill lines and stuff like that. Some things to consider as you go along, but basically you just get it heated up to where it's molten and pour it in the mold. And if you're quick about it, usually it will do a pretty good job. You may have a little bit of sinking that you'll have to fill in a sinkhole or two before the whole thing cools. But really it's pretty simple, fast, very fast. And you'll end up with a pretty good casting. It does have a little bit of shrinkage to like 3% sometimes. And so you have to deal with that. Some of the detail gets lost in translation there. But like Kerf is saying, if you look at this as an intermediate step, it's just a step in the process. And actually, if you listen to Stephen Geddes on that Toys on Tap interview as well, he talks about this too. You don't spend a whole lot of time in the clay stage. You just want to get rough shapes, because you're going to have to mold it and cast it in wax, and the wax is where you put all the details in. So I know Kerf's dealt with this when he did his number 2, same deal, and I'm dealing with it in my General Kale sculpt, because it's the first one, and it's like I want to make it perfect, but put way too much effort into it. It's all going to be gone in the wax stage, and then I got to sculpt it back in. But when you sculpt it back in, it's much cleaner, crisper. You can get a lot more definition in those lines. There's no squishing it with your hands like you would with clay, those type of things.
Yeah.
So it's I think a much better material for that final stage right before you mold and cast into a resin hard copy, say.
Yeah. Why don't we? I can do an example of that cast.
Okay.
Well, why don't you go and turn your video off, and it should make my screen bigger.
Okay.
Cool. Can you see in the YouTube channel version, is it the full screen now?
Yes.
Cool. Right. So with casting, and here's what I'm going to do. My very first cast of wax and plaster molds just over 2 years ago, I guess 2.5 years ago now. I didn't know this one weird trick, and I later learned it from Stephen Geddes when I talked to him much later after that time. But the trick with plaster, or the thing you have to watch out for, is if it's not moist enough, your wax will pretty much bond with the plaster, and when that happens, you're basically having to break your mold to get your casting out, and you basically broken your casting along with it. So here I've soaked the mold, soaked this plaster in some water, and it's basically just cold water out of the tap. Nothing special about it. It doesn't have to be warm or anything. And just get out those wet spots. The plaster is really good at absorbing that water. And what I found is it basically allows there's no interaction with the wax and the plaster surface. It just kind of creates this really nice clean separation between the two, and things just pop right out. So now plaster is a great alternative to silicone when your sculpture is relatively simple. With silicone molds, you obviously have the benefit of being able to stretch around odd contours, more complex contours. But with plaster molds, you really have to account for and eliminate any undercuts. Otherwise, you're going to struggle to remove your casts from it. Now, for me, that was an intentional design decision when I was doing the number 2 figure, because I wanted to kind of have that factory steel mold constraint in my design, that these figures had to have very little or really no undercuts in order to be cast in a factory. And so when you ever examine a old action figure, very simple shapes, the contours on them are very shallow, yet they just express so much design detail. But really, it's been optimized for that steel mold casting. So that's why I went to plaster, and it's also super cheap. So there's always that. Now, with the plaster, or rather with the wax, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and pull this hot wax. This is Hasbro wax. If it sounds like Hasbro, that's intentional. It's apparently a reverse engineer of the Hasbro wax. We've talked to sculptors from a number of different companies, and they all have their favorites, and some loathe the Hasbro wax. We've met a couple that were diehard Scott Hensey wax fans, and so some separation can happen when you're melting it down, depending on the ingredients you used, the quality of those ingredients. John, I was melting down some of the willow ice you had made, and the talc settled to the bottom. And I realized, I think the talc that I sent you wasn't refined enough. And so there were a lot of heavier particles to it that ended up settling.
because I didn't have that settling when I used some other talc that I bought online. So there's, yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to mention this. So the talc component, each sculpting wax has its own like mixture of elements, and talc is an element that's used to kind of it gives it carvability. It helps to make that you can get those sharp lines and be able to carve it away without it chipping and things like that. So that's why but there's options. There's other options too. There's different things you can put that can do the same thing.
Yeah. So here, I'm going to pull this back out, and if you stir it too long off of a hot plate, now you could have a big pot like that. In that pot, I have these smaller dishes. They're like a stainless steel dish, but you could also do it on a hot plate. But here, I'm just using a regular syringe, like a plastic disposable one. These lower lock tips can get pretty narrow, so I like to snip off the end at a little angle there, and then draw it up. And you don't have much time to work with it, so here I go. And we should see it pop out the side there. There we go.
Yeah, as soon as it goes in that syringe, it's already starting to cool. The syringe is trying to cool it. The air around the syringe is trying to cool it. So you have to work very fast.
Yeah.
But it's nice because it's fast.
Yeah. No, I mean, when you compare this to, let's go through the list of clays that are inferior to wax. There's Sculpey and epoxy clay, monster clay, which, they're inferior in that they don't have all of the benefits that we see from working with wax, but certainly there are artists out there that are doing incredible things with those different clays. But we, I guess some of the benefits of wax for me, and John, you've started to talk about them, but for me, it's that instantaneous kind of hardness. I don't have to wait for epoxy clay to cure. I don't have to bake super Sculpey. Monster clay is never going to get hard. I don't have to like chill it to kind of get those finer details. With wax, and having started with a wax, with a clay sculpt and making a wax cast, now I can just like work on all those fine details all at once. I don't have to wait on anything. That's a real selling point for me. How about you?
Yeah, for sure. And I was just noticed there's a Retro Tinker was asking about reusing the syringes. Everything with wax is super easy cleanup. It dries, and then you can break it apart, put it back in the pot, and reuse it. Although you have to be careful about contaminants. So you want to keep things like if you're using one thing for wax, you want to keep that as a wax tool and not use it with resins and things like that. You don't want other contaminants.
True. Scott Hensey's video, he talked about keeping kind of a clean area, even when he's doing his wax, where he's making his batches and doing his casting. And I think he had a standard in his studio that the wax that you cast with should be like just like pure, like any dirt or lint or things like that might fall into it can show up in the surface of your wax casting. And in my novice mind, I'm thinking that's not going to really make a difference, but there must be something about kind of having that like pure wax surface that ultimately makes a difference, not only in the later casting process, but probably also in how you kind of show your clients these wax sculpts. You just want them to be as clean as possible. So there's definitely keeping the area clean. If you have a cat, like I do, the hair is going to show up everywhere, and I just kind of deal with it if it shows up in a sculpt. And a little later, I guess we can show you how easy it is to clean out something that some foreign object in your wax, and quickly repair it. What's another benefit of wax that I found?
Well, I think like you were saying, it's just it doesn't squish like clay does. It's much more. It picks up a lot more of the detail. You can
it polishes up really well too.
Polishes. Right? You can carve it easily. It's not, like even epoxy is. It's easy to carve it, but wax is cleaner. It's like smoother, easier to carve, and it's not. It's like non-toxic. You know, you're not getting dust and fumes and stuff. It's wax.
So in the 3 minutes we've been talking, this is already cool, and I can take this this casting out. Oh man, that's so. There's a cat here, but like soaking these things. Certainly, it's a simple design, but like I waited 3 minutes to get a hard copy, basically, of a clay sculpt. And then, any number of carving implements can be used to clean off any of the parting lines. But, really going from a wax, from a clay rough to a wax casting of your clay rough, now begins the time where you're going in with those finer tools to add, to reveal those details, that are in there. But it's also a time to add wax to it to build up things like pouches or side holsters or lapels. You can imagine the clay rough for this guy probably didn't have these lapel details, and that those were added in wax later. John, do you want to show on your end how your wax pen works and adding stuff, and then I'll show mine?
Sure. Let me switch the camera here. Oh, I guess I should real quick. This thing I'm wearing is called an optivisor, and I can't work without it. It's a 10-time magnification, and then it's got these little LED lights on it, so I can light up what I'm looking at. With any of this kind of working this small, I just I prefer having a little bit more magnification, and this is the easiest for me. I know Kerf has got a light with a boom arm that comes over, and I've tried those, and it just sort of feels like it's in the way, but this somehow doesn't bother me, so it's what I use. But let's switch the camera back.
Ordinary Toys asks if wax gets air bubbles. It can, and depending on how quickly the wax cools in the mold as you're casting it, it can create cavities. And as you're sculpting, you might find those cavities when you break through a certain portion of it. I haven't found that those cavities, or they haven't yet, at least, compromise the integrity of the sculpt itself to the point that it was fragile. But it's possible, and there are particular things to think about when casting in small molds. But if you have an open mold where you're kind of doing a dump mold, we can talk later about how there are different kind of casting techniques that can ensure, one, you avoid shrink, but also things like those inner cavity bubbles as well. But yeah, that's a good question.
So on this waxer, I was just going to change the tip. So I don't know if you can see that, but I've got a fine point tip on this one.
Could you do this? Could you remove the book? The white of the pages is kind of blowing out, and then can you zoom in on the tip there? Yeah, good.
Yeah, so it's got a fine point. Oops, I find where the camera is. Fine point on it there. Basically, it's got the wire attached here that the electricity will go through and back, And so this one, you unscrew this little knob, you pull it out. It's got the 2 tips there. And then I'll grab my spoon. So this is a flat spoon shape. And basically I just plug that in and tighten that down, and we're good to go. So the spoon shape I like to use anyway for more broad strokes, lots more wax. It heats up more evenly and more quickly, a lot of wax than the fine point one does. So the fine point I use all the time for actually like sculpting and putting wax on in small areas, like I'm trying to actually make a shape or make a design or something like that. Whereas this is a lot more like moving and shaking, just trying to either get wax off or put wax on to a surface. And there's a lot more tips too, but these are the 2 that I use all the time.
Do you find, have you used the wax tips to actually do sculpting, or is it a tool for adding wax only? Like, what have you found?
Both. So I have this little guy here. Let me zoom back in. But this, I was talking about this the last time we talked when we were doing our Instagram live. But this is a piece that I used to. This is actually before I got this waxer. So this was with a soldering iron, which we can talk about later. But I drew out the design on this piece of plastic, and then I used the waxer to basically put wax in the places I wanted to on the letters. So the dark stuff here is wax on top of the white plastic. And then you can go back, and I used an X-Acto blade to scrape them flat because they end up a little bit bumpy. And then I used an X-Acto blade to maybe like, oh, that's a little bit blobby. I'll pull that square, that type of thing after the fact. But that's a point, an instance, I guess, where you use this fine tip to actually like sculpt. Another instance for this would be like if I was like stuff I'm prepping for molding, where you don't want undercuts. So like this piece right here, if I
can you get into the camera a little better,
yeah.
Or zoom out a little?
This right here, this under this horn, there's an undercut, and so I would take the wax, and I can show you this in real time here in a minute. But basically, all you gotta do is heat up the waxer, put your wax material on it. It'll melt right down into that gap, and it automatically fills those gaps. It's super nice for that. That's one of those things that wax is inherently good at, and that I don't think you can find with other materials. It's quick, it's easy, it's fast, so that's one of the things where you might use that because you want the fine tip to get into those little crevices or whatever.
Right.
I should say I use it all the time for that.
Cool. Yeah. Wax is just a great filling medium. It's I've found even in making my armature kits, before I mold it, if there's like a broken part to it or something like that, I can actually just use wax to fill in the cracks, just for the purpose of getting it molded, and and be able to polish it and refine the surface and do all the detail work in it. It's not just for sculpting. That's great for repair.
Yeah, definitely. And that's like Kerf has some pretty good examples on his Instagram of where something went wrong. Something got broken, something fell and snapped. And if it's in
every
wax,
project. Yeah.
But if it's in wax, it's not a big deal. It's pretty easy to fix it, as long as you know how to sculpt, like and if it's your sculpture, which it usually is, you just redo it. It's no big deal. So
what wax are you using there?
What is this one? I think this was a willow recipe, but I don't remember which one now.
It looks kind of gray here. Is it more green to you?
It's gray green.
Okay.
Yeah. I do have the Hensey recipe here as well.
Cool.
And I guess I got a couple more I can show too if you're interested in other flavors. But
yeah, we're going to show an example of it flowing into your sculpt, and then I can switch to show my tools.
Yeah, we'll see if my waxer wants to heat up here.
Yeah, good point.
This piece, by the way, is this is a sculpt by Grundlehead on Instagram, and so this is a small casting that he gave me. And then
Can you bring
this
it closer to the camera?
Yeah, sorry.
It's a little blown out. I'm thinking if you bring it.
So
you're on your.
I'll switch cameras here.
Yeah, to your phone one, right?
That one's being a little sketchy at the moment, but I'll show on this one.
Oh yeah, it's cool.
So yeah, he did this as a digital 3D sculpt and then 3D print, and then this is actually resin cast of the 3D print, the white stuff here. And then this body was, I think, a failed print. It has like the bottom of it was pretty well defined, but the top it has this like slumpy, like it melted. And so I just kind of went with it, and this gray stuff is epoxy sculpt. This is what I do typically. I'll use epoxy sculpt to build up the main forms. This has tinfoil underneath it, but epoxy to build up the forms, and I used it to glue this piece to this piece, and then I'm going to go in and put wax over the top to do detail work, make it look cohesive, and also put some texture in there. And then you can kind of see the undercut I was talking about there with the horn. That's probably a better view of it. So yeah, that's what we're going to work on a little bit. This thing heats up. I don't know why it's not heating. Oh, there it goes. Okay. It was causing me problems there for a second. Let's switch the camera back so you can see the top view. And maybe I'll use the Hensey just because it's red and you can see it probably a little better.
Yeah. Yeah, if you can touch it, that's not hot enough.
No, it's not. It's not hot. It's warm. It was like warm for a second. So I was like, oh, we're good. I don't know what happened. I'm going to switch my tip. There we go. See, it's getting warm now.
Oh, wow.
It wasn't making contact. That's how electricity works, in case you guys didn't know that.
That got hot quick.
Yeah, I had it turned all the way up because it wasn't.
Why don't you go ahead and zoom in too? Cool.
So basically, I just dip my waxer into the goo here, make it molten, and then I'm just gonna stick it in here and let it flow into the cracks. And then if it's a little bit more than I want, that's okay. I can always remove it after the fact. It's a little bit of like, I sculpt that way anyway. It's like additive, subtractive. So it really works for me. I suppose if there's somebody that just wants to just be additive and they don't ever do any subtractive, maybe it's a little funky, but I don't know anybody like that, honestly. So yeah, and then it's like, oh, well, it's just kind of clumpy. Well, all you gotta do is put the heat on it, it'll melt, and then it'll automatically try and find those voids, so it fills in those little gaps. I don't know if you guys are seeing that. It's hard to.
Yeah, it's helpful that it's red.
Okay. So that's that. Basically, all the way around, I'll just keep doing more of that to make everything cohesive. And then once everything's like filled in and I feel good about the shape and all that jazz, I'll start doing all the final detail work where I'm going to put some little Stephen Geddes dots on here to make a little bit of texture. That's kind of what I'm thinking. So
yeah, his story of having to draft all the dots on the I think it was actually this guy. Oh, let me share my screen or my video here. The trash compactor monster was one that he worked on.
yeah,
and
the first thing he worked on.
Oh, was it?
Yeah.
Yeah, all the little bumps on there. They had him go back and draft all the dots, and by drafting that means kind of refining the contours so that there aren't any even subtle overhangs, undercuts.
Yeah. Yep. No undercuts.
And all that helps for the piece to remove cleanly from the steel molds.
Yeah, and like so there, and also when they're doing their a lot of their in-house mold making, it was plaster, so
yeah,
it's not forgiving of undercuts, not like silicone does.
So I want to show the alcohol lamp and my wax carver now.
Yeah, I'm gonna just work with. Oh, it's not my video, but I'm working in the background.
All right. So what we have here, we have the alcohol lamp, and by now I think my wick has soaked up the alcohol in the bottom. So a little, and you have to be careful here because the flame is very, very faint. Starting. Let go a little more. A great resource for these kind of jewelry supplies, for either the lamps or the wax carvers. Check out Otto Frey, Frei, and Rio Grande online. Just great, big inventories. Lots of tools. The wax they have though is primarily used in that jeweler's use case. But if you want to find Hasbro wax, which is right now the only retail wax, you can get that at sculpt.com. Their site's a little old. It's not your modern e-commerce browsing experience, but find your way to their digital catalog, and you can find Hasbro wax, AZBRO, and I think they have a lot in stock. So yeah. Now that I have this going, oh good, you can kind of see the flame going there. So this is bringing me back. I haven't used this thing in I think I maybe worked with this for maybe about 4 months or so before I was like, let's do it. Let's go for the Fordham wax carver, the same that Robert Chalone uses, and it's a great, handy, very small, and very consistent in terms of temperature control. So I'll show that a little later, but right away, we can look at how I'll heat up the metal tool here. This is just like a dental tool. I actually got this set of tools from Blick Art Supplies, and so hold it over that flame for about 5-6 seconds, and then you can just go right in. And John, let me know if this is blurry right here. I can't quite tell the focus because
no, looks good. You're good.
Yeah, so I can use it to actually carve away here, and actually when using a tool like this, especially in kind of carving, it's good to keep your tools clean. So I'll just wipe it here on the side, melt it off a little bit, and then I can go back in and keep carving away. Now, that wax also breaks off pretty easily too. And usually in this scenario, I'll even take an X-Acto blade and trim off those casting artifacts where the sprue comes in or the vents go off, and then clean that up. Now another tool. Well, I'll stick to the hot tools before getting into the cold stuff. So let's say we wanted to add a pouch to the side of this leg. I'd heat this tool up over here. Then I'd come over to a block of wax, just like John was doing, and then carry it over. Now, this is where working with a flame is tedious and can be annoying. The tools will lose their heat pretty quickly, and even there, I kept that wax over there a little too long, and it burned. But it's heat it up a little bit, get the wax on there, heat it up a little bit more, and then come over and drop it on. An important thing to remember about wax is that it actually doesn't bond to itself like when you just drop it on. Scott Hensey first demonstrated this on that interview video. I was kind of blown away when I first saw it, and but it was something that I had seen kind of just when looking at candle wax, where if candle wax drops on something and it's cold, like the surface is cold, the wax just chips right off. And so a similar thing happens with this wax. If it drops onto the surface, just like there we go. Yep. See, the stuff cools just on like that. Oh, you saw a little dot there. That should just pop off. I say that now, but that one's stuck a little bit more. But typically the rule is when you're adding the wax, be sure that the hot metal touches the surface that you're dropping the wax into, and that'll help that wax bond and create a strong bond that's not going to chip off. Now I'm a little rusty with this flame. I've kind of lost sense of when the hot points are and how quickly I have to move between things. And so I'm going to switch over to my electric. I'll cap that. Move that over there. Now, so here, my electric pen here, I got a little spoon tip. If you recall, John's his tips are kind of this thin, kind of like rod that, or I guess it's like a loop. So, and that loop gets flattened out, or you have like a fine tipped kind of loop that bends back on itself, and that is the channel that's creating that circuit with this tool. And I think there are more of the modern ones, I think, are like this today, where there's a heating element on the inside, and then the tip is just kind of the sleeve that goes over the top. So with that, I can actually and I can switch out different tips. There's like a needle tip. There's a wide kind of paddle tip there, and the rheostat's keeping things at a nice temperature, and then I can go in and start adding that wax on there rather quickly. not waiting for that flame to heat the tool and keep the wax hot. And if you go too fast, you do have to let it cool down, but it's just a matter of seconds for that to happen. John, are you keeping an eye on the comments?
I am. Nothing. I've been answering a couple of them. There was some questions about wax, sticking to a silicone, and like I said, really the only thing I've seen is if the carnauba content is a bit high.
Yeah.
Sometimes the temperature has to be just right, but it can stick to a silicone mold. Other than that, wax is a really good release agent, right? So,
yeah. Robert Talone had a great example of that happening. I think he had a old batch of wax that he was using to demonstrate wax casting, and he experienced that same thing where he realized I think over 2 videos he was trying to scratch his head about like what it could be, and I think he ended up saying that the wax ingredients had an effect, and I think it was carnauba in that case.
Yeah, and I had the exact same thing happen to me, so it's real.
All right, so yeah, and just in a few passes, you can start to build up larger details like pouches, things like that. And for me, excuse me, I'm really just adding wax as a with that spoon tip as a rough kind of sculpt, and then it's going back in with the hard tools that I'll start to refine all these details. That's what I did here with this gator here. I had a base casting in wax, and so I wanted to build up this Viking tunic and furry boots onto that base. And so in my last video on Instagram, I was just going in and dropping lots of wax on this, and kind of saving myself trouble by doing that initial wax casting from a base sculpt, and then going in and adding the costume solely in wax. Anything else to say about hot tools?
A couple comments here. We talked about using packing tape as an alternative for large areas if you're doing like a mold wall. Beeswax is great, but it takes a little bit to melt it down and cover a large area. And yeah, the lamp makes the process look like some kind of distinguished Victorian era gentleman toy maker. I suppose it does, but it's very inexpensive, easy to use way to make it happen for you. So I highly suggest if you're just trying to get started, it's a good way to do that.
Yeah.
And I'll just say, you have to excuse me for a minute. I'm going to rearrange a few things, so I'm going to be quiet for a minute here.
All right. So I guess the next thing to talk about would be cold tools. So if you think hot tools, you have cold tools. You're not going to get away with carving wax with any, like, it's not for those clay shapers, those soft tips or anything. Even when it's melted, even in the like few moments where it's semi-solid as it's cooling, that's no time to start pushing it around because it'll easily crack. So all of your soft tip tools set those aside when you're working with wax. And I would, I guess I would characterize cold tools into maybe 3 categories. And John, when you get back on, maybe you'll have a thought about this. I would say there are kind of chopping tools. So those are your X-Acto blades. Those might be these, bigger, broader edged tools where you're going to be really digging in to carve away big chunks, or even kind of scraping the surface. Now you'll see, I think wax may be different from all the other kinds of sculpting mediums, is one that flakes when you carve it. With there's really no kind of unless you're using like a loop tool on clay. Maybe I'm being too general there. If you use a loop tool on clay, this is some monster clay here. You do that kind of heavy carving, and you get those curls of that material. The same thing happens with clay, with wax here. So I'd say you have tools for removing larger volumes of wax. Then you have your finer tip tools. So here it's like a dentist pick. I would use that to kind of refine edges, get really close here. And I know this isn't going to be, actually I don't know how to zoom in. Zoom in on Zoom. There's you're really kind of removing micro layers. It's kind of the equivalent of sanding, epoxy sculpture or something like that. You're really just kind of working the surface back and forth. And so in this kind of fashion, I'm using this tool almost as like it's really burnishing. I'm not intentionally like gouging the wax. I'm really just running the edge of a cold tool over the surface to remove any blemishes. Now, another helpful tool for that are these loop tools. This is just a round wire, which is different from these. These kind of flat clay loop tools. I think the sculpting style is chiaroscuro sculpting or something like that. I think this might actually work on here, but using these rounded edges on this loop tool, it's just great for just that kind of polishing effect, and that's considered burnishing. And burnishing is a term you'd hear when working in metal, in kind of fine jewelry, metal finishing. I think there's even this tool here, which is called a burnisher, and it's just this blunt tip, and something even like that. You're just using that blunt surface to smooth out any of the surface abnormalities. With wax, you never have to worry about your fingerprints unless it was captured in the mold from your clay. I find from time to time these ball styluses that are often used in clay are good carvers for wax too. But use those choppers to remove the big chunks of wax. The X-Acto blade is helpful also because it's got a nice straight edge to it.
Yeah, I'd say I use the X-Acto blade 90% of the time. Like an old X-Acto does most of what I need.
Yeah. And just like that, now I've squared off this pouch. I could use a square tip tool here to kind of finish carving off and cleaning that edge around it. How's the light there? Okay. Yeah, there we go.
Looks good.
A tool that I have on hand to help things stay clean is this stiff brush here, and that quickly removes any of that wax flake. If too much of it is sitting on your sculpt while you're sculpting, it can get up under your carving tool and cause it to slip, and then you gouge more than you want to, which isn't good. Now that I have a leg here, as John was saying, inevitably, a wax sculpt I'm working on will fall over during the course of the sculpt and break. And I'd say they are fragile. It's not durable by any means like epoxy sculpt, but it will hold up in most cases. But if this were to fall over, it breaks pretty easily, and it breaks rather cleanly too, which is great because the next step is repairing something like that. And I've learned to not get upset by that happening because the repair is quite easy, and it doesn't really set you back. But the idea is you don't like melt one side and melt the other and then stick them together, and hope that it sticks. It's not going to work like that. One, because the chance that it'll actually bond, or that you have time to melt both sides, and then before you stick them together, I think would be low that they would actually create a good bond. But you're also, in melting it, you're removing the volume in that interface. And so the idea here, and you don't want to use glue or anything because you have the glue right here in your wax itself. So the idea is, I'm going to stitch this together. And I say stitch because the way to approach it is very much like stitching. And I'm going to line it up here. Make sure it's...
There's a comment that Retro Tinker says a little part of him died when you just snapped the leg. But that's the point. It's going to be okay. You can fix any of it. You can fix anything.
So here, I'm holding them together. It's a pretty good match. And the idea is, take the tool. It's hot. Let's see. Double check it's hot. Yeah. And now I'm just going to stab through it. And what I'm doing is, as that tool is going through, is it's melting the surface, the two surfaces where they meet. So I'm going through, and I'll kind of feel where it gets a little loose because that's the interface there. Turn it over, and really I can just tack it in a few places, and then it's strong enough to hold together. And then I can go back in and go all the way through. Now, I don't just want to do it just at the surface of the break. I want to go all the way in because that's going to restore the bond all the way through. And actually, I felt some loose spots in there, which makes me think that there might be a hollow cavity inside the leg there that didn't fill. No, I think I was just maybe too loose in there. I was thinking I didn't see if there were a cavity inside, you would have seen a hole in that break. But yeah, it's a little messy now, as any wound is when you repair it like this, even in real life. But then the process to kind of restore the surface is go back in, quickly add back the material lost. When sculpting wax and adding with the intention to remove, it's important to add more than needs to be there, because that'll give you the flexibility to carve it away and have enough material to achieve the final detail. If that made sense. All right, so yeah, now I've added that wax back, and a little blow, and I could probably even come back in, use my burnishing tool here. All right. Another helpful thing, I keep this brush nearby, and when the tool fills up with wax like that, instead of setting down the piece and getting a cloth to wipe it off, I just keep the bristles there and just dab it in. Now it's clean. I don't have to drop the piece or set it down. Another good tool for that kind of wax removal would be like a static cloth you might use for cleaning surfaces. It's great for picking up all that finer dust.
So there's a question about stabbing the leg to make the bond. So it's pushing the hot tool all the way through in multiple areas. So when you push it through, it'll melt the wax on both sides of the break.
Yep.
When you pull it out, it cools very quickly. So you have a chance to go back in a different spot.
Yeah.
And basically weld it all in small chunks.
Yeah. I'd say, I say stitching, but I would say the action is maybe more akin to welding. You're heating two sides of you're heating two interfacing solid pieces, or solid pieces that are interfacing one another by heating them together and right next to each other. The heated material will then bond together. Yeah. So that's, from my perspective, that's kind of the basics. It's that adding the wax where you want to carve away details. It's heavier carving implements, it's finer carving implements. Another, it's just kind of this like scribe tip here. It's just a sharp point that can be helpful even for kind of scribing in. I think it's called a scribe. You could scribe in letters. You could scribe in little ridges. Say it's that kind of pouch flap detail there. Come in there, put that flap on, and I want that flap to be a little higher than the area behind it, and so I can come in with my broad, flat carving tool and carve right up to that scored line, really.
I'd say it feels like like you're carving in a softwood maybe, but it's not wood, so there's no grain.
Yeah,
it's smooth, but it's easy to carve.
And if you have a box of crayons at home, or you don't mind stealing from your children, I'd say that wax is a good, in that it's not like a candle, and it's closer to this. And I believe both crayons have talc in them too, so it's got some of those carving properties that you would find in this. In terms of solvents, I realize that kind of comes up when talking about clays. Orange oil is a pretty effective solvent. It kind of loosens and softens the surface chemistry of wax. Too much of it, maybe sitting on there too long, it could soften it more than you want. But it can be good for kind of broad areas that you want to kind of polish quickly. Another solution to use is just rubbing alcohol. And rubbing alcohol actually has the effect of cooling the wax. And I forget who it was that mentioned it. But what I found is it's great when burnishing. So if I take, I take a, I'm just going to use water here for now, but dip the wire loop tool in that alcohol, and then come over, and it almost acts as like a lubricant on the surface, but at the same time it's going to cool it so that even the friction created by that burnishing isn't going to heat the surface of it enough that it starts to warp more than you want it to, but it keeps it cool as you're burnishing and really helps create a nice polished surface. I also find the lens cleaning cloths are good for polishing. You can use pantyhose, you can use kind of t-shirt material as well. Any of those fine fibers are good for polishing the surface, and you can get a nice shine there. You can go further and apply acrylic varnish to wax, and get some nice results prior to molding.
So I switched to my phone. I'm going to try the video here, but I wanted to show
Sure.
too, like cutting something off with a sprue. Let's see if it works. Oops. Put my camera. So hopefully you can see that, but guess can you see that?
You need a couple more lamps in there, man.
Yeah, I had to leave the bedroom. People are going to bed. Did I freeze up? Sorry.
Oh, I froze up too.
Technical difficulties, but basically I have a little X-Acto saw blade, and you can use that in the wax. It cuts really nicely, and it actually helps lubricate the saw as it goes through.
I think your video stopped. Yeah.
Sorry. But yeah, it helps lubricate the saw as it goes through, actually. So it's not a problem. Use a saw blade on sculpting wax.
Yeah, we gotta get better lenses. I don't like that this stuff gets blurry for people. You're cutting out again.
I turned my video off. Let me just mute myself here. If you can go back to your screen.
Oh, yeah, there we go.
We'll just give some running commentary as we go from here on out then.
Yeah, well, I was gonna pick back up where I left off on my gator last time, and keep working on him. Yeah, I feel like we've covered some of the good basics. What do you think?
Yeah, I was going to say, we kind of covered, we wanted introductions and talk about some tools and some basics tonight. As we get further, we'll do more videos and we'll have different topics we're going to discuss and answer questions and things like that. So if you got any other topics or things you want us to talk about, put it in the comments and we'll definitely get that in the future.
Yeah, I think we should do one on wax ingredients and recipes.
Yeah, that'd be a good one. I could talk for hours about that nerdy stuff.
I'll just let you go at it while I sculpt.
Yeah, let's see. We are coming up on an hour and a half in, so probably another half hour or so we'll be here, and then we'll have to save it for the next one, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah. Thought for a minute my video might work if I didn't talk, but nope. Technical difficulties. I guess I'll just say too, like we're talking benefits. Wax is one of those where it's really easy to take two different elements and put them together. One, you can put wax on top of pretty much any substance, and it will stick, but other things won't stick to it. So it makes a really good medium if you're going to use it before you do a mold and a cast in resin type of thing. You can use it to glue two pieces of resin together, basically, quote unquote glue. You can use it to sculpt something on top of resin or PVC plastic or any number of other materials. You can use it to fill in holes, right? Gaps and things like that. Say you had wood, and you need to fill in those little valleys in between the grains. You can do that with wax really easily. So there's a lot of uses. But for me, I think it's like it's good if you're gonna mold and cast it. If it's a final product, not so much probably. What'd you say, Kerf?
I didn't see anything.
Yeah, just thinking it's I had a project recently where I was trying to get something done quickly and knew I wouldn't have time to do molding and casting, so I had to choose a different material. And although I think wax is far superior as far as like what I would have preferred to work in, you can't paint on it, so or at least it makes it really difficult for paint to stick onto wax. So I had to choose a different material because I knew didn't have time to do the molding cast. Had I had time, definitely would have used wax and then mold, cast in resin, and then you can paint on resin nice and easy. But
no, I didn't have too much trouble with the acrylic varnish I was using, it adhering, but it did scrape off. It's not a lasting surface to paint to. As you were saying, not much sticks to it, but it adheres long enough to get a mold off of it.
Okay, yeah. This was like, I had to have nice photos and nice paint job, and I just didn't want to take the risk with it not sticking to the wax.
Yeah.
But that's really the only, yeah. That's really the only downside, in my opinion. I will say too, there's different types of waxes, and we'll get into that in other episodes, but each wax has its own benefits and properties. You might use it for a different purpose. So say you have sprue wax that's easy to flow, you might use that to fill gaps and make sure there's no undercuts type of thing. If you have sculpting wax, that's something where you build something up. It's able to hold a little bit of strength and carvability, that type of thing. There's sticky wax, which you might use to glue something to another something. And then like we made a willow recipe called Air, and it's like clay, and I like to use that to build mold walls, so you can stick it in between the cracks in the mold wall, like clay, and then you can melt it in there with your wax pen, and it makes a nice watertight seal. So just different uses for different types of waxes, and we can get into all that stuff later on.
I am looking forward to it. So your camera's not working, buddy.
Yeah, I had a time limit here. We have early risers, so early to bed. I got to set up my shed. That's the other thing you'll be seeing on my YouTube channel hopefully here soon. I'll be setting up my shed for all of this stuff, and when it's done, I'll have a place to be.
All right. Yeah, so this is my first time sculpting fur. So the tunic that this Viking gator is going to be wearing is going to be kind of a furry, kind of bear kind of design, where it's, we'll see some, where it won't, I think depending on how much I'm liking the texture that I'm creating, I'll either do it full across, or I'll kind of do some smooth areas, with where it's more like an illustration, where you're not drawing every curve of the fur across the surface, but you're showing that where it overlaps, and where it's layered. But there'll be a couple of different layers there. Have a belt, some like shoulder details, have some fuzzy kind of strap leg warmers there. So I have the rough sections there. I think maybe I need to look out this leg a little bit more. Just thinking, like, are there any other sculpting mediums that kind of go from a liquid to a solid state, where you have to kind of understand some degree of how fluids work under gravity as you're sculpting? I was thinking plaster, but usually if you're sculpting in plaster, you get it to more of a paste before you start doing any of that. Right.
Sure. And monster clay has a similar properties to wax in that way.
Yeah.
That's really all I can think of.
Yeah, I'm when I think of the other artists I've seen work in monster clay, I don't think I can think of any that have used hot tools to do any of that, other than maybe in the casting. But it's easy enough to add monster clay with your fingers rather than having to melt it.
Yeah, I'd say that's a bonus, but also a bit of a drawback because it's just as easy to squish it too and ruin all the detail work.
Exactly. Point for wax.
I think it's like we said earlier. I mean, it's a tool along the way. Like, I think it's really useful to use clay or epoxy sculpt or something like that initially, and then use wax as the secondary stage.
Yeah.
I don't think either one is as good without the other.
It's very diplomatic of you.
It's true, though. I mean, not just saying it to be
it is true.
It is
true. Even in the time that I've been working with wax, I've noticed my own kind of increase in speed to working with it, and I can imagine the guys who are sculpting in it full time, were quick in their own regard, but I can also see why digital sculpting won the battle, because it's faster for a lot more people to do a digital sculpt than to do things in clay.
I think too, it's a lot easier to transport it across the world.
Yeah, and if you made something too big or too small, that's
no big deal.
Yeah, no big deal.
I missed a couple comments here. So Mr. Ordinary asks, are there waxes that are light enough in color to accept pigments, or is the coloring process strictly to paint the piece? And no, the coloring would go in when you're creating your wax batch. And that is usually in order to find something that's like neutral enough for your eye to be able to see the details in it, and also not like tire your eyes from staring at it for too long. So you can do any kind of color pigment you like. Most of the wax ingredients are fairly transparent, actually, and you have to put some white in there to make it opaque.
Yeah, the talc lightens things up pretty quickly, but it's titanium oxide. titanium oxide or titanium dioxide, I forget which, gives it the opaque quality. This wax here, I tinted with what's it called? Burnt sienna pigment to get this color here with this Kenner wax, with the Asbro, with Scott Hensey's. I believe, or at least with Scott Hensey's, we know it's crayons that he just throws in at the end. With others, you can use other powdered minerals to tint tint the wax, but it's purely for kind of visual stuff. It doesn't necessarily change the chemistry in a significant way.
Yeah, and as you saw, like, it's nice to have a couple options if you're trying to make it visible against a different color surface. It's nice to have a light color and a darker color, maybe like a red and a tan. Say, it just gives you some options.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. Retro Tinker asks, if you were to sculpt, say, a jacket, would you be better off refining one layer at a time or roughing out all the details at once and then refining later? And I guess if I were to sculpt something flowing like a jacket or a cape or something like that, I think I would have a pretty good armature first that gave me that shape. So whether that be like cardboard or paper or some sort of like mesh wire, I would refine that shape there first. And then you can fill that in either with clay or even wax on paper or cardboard can stiffen that stuff up. Then you can sculpt on top of that. And I think that's how I'd do it. What about you, Kerf?
Let me see if I understand the question. I guess by layers. I'm wondering if you're thinking if there's an undershirt and then a vest and then a jacket, those as layers of clothing. I in that regard, I don't think sculpting the layers would make sense. I think doing a clay sculpt of it and showing each of those layers, because if you're trying to show like depth in it, it can be let's say I'm just gonna do it here.
I guess I misunderstood the question. I don't sculpt layers like that.
Yeah, if we were to sculpt the layers of a jacket, so a jacket, a vest, and a t-shirt underneath there, you could say the jacket, outer jacket, comes in like this. So right now I'm just scoring this. We'll say there's a vest in there that comes in as a V at the top, and then there's going to be a t-shirt or some kind of collared shirt up above there. I might rough that in. You can kind of see that there. But then to sculpt that, I'd have to, scrape away. Within my cut lines there. And anytime you're carving in big ways like this, you risk slipping and carving more than you wanted. So that eats up time. If you're not satisfied with it, you have to fill it back in. And and then carve away again. That takes up time. But if you were to do it in clay first, then you can, mess up. You can get your proportions right. You can get the right depth. That makes sense. And
yeah, see, that's basically what I would do. I'd sculpt those major forms in either clay or epoxy or something like that first, and then all you gotta do is clean it up and wax, make it sharper.
Yeah. So just in a few passes there, you can begin to see how you might go about sculpting, of carving that away. But anything like clothing folds, I would, and I would say there are sculptors that would go right to wax and sculpt folded clothing like that. They are masters of their craft, and I am far from it. So I would go with the thing that was easiest for me, and that would be starting in clay. I think we should have made a disclaimer at the beginning. We are by no means experts or professionals at this, and
we're archaeologists, excavators, trying to figure it out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd say too. I've done some stuff with wax where I'm trying to build up forms, like large forms, and it's just tedious. It takes longer because you have to go melt the wax, put it on, melt the wax, put it on, melt the wax, put it on. Whereas if you did it with clay, it's about 2 seconds to just slap some clay on there and you're good. So I think for me, that's the easier way to do it, is in the clay stage. And then, like I said, when you get to wax, it's just refining those forms that you already put on there. But that said, I mean, you can't always do that. So you got to do what you got to do. I hope we answered your question, Retro Tinker. Let us know if we didn't. Good. Sounds like we got it. I was gonna say too, you were talking about carving into a wax sculpt, and as you were working on a piece that had an armature underneath it, that's a concern as well, that you could dive into that armature underneath, and you don't really want that, because obviously that's going to be a harder surface, and you're not really going to be able to carve into it. So that's a consideration as well. Before you start, is the armature, and we're probably going to dedicate a whole episode to armatures, so I won't get too deep into it, but it's just part of the planning process. You got to think about what you're going to be doing and kind of figure out the best way to get there. And you might have to adjust the armature before you start sculpting on top of it, or use that for the clay stage and then cast it completely in wax and sculpting wax without the armature in the way. That's another option. So I don't want to get too deep into it, but maybe a teaser.
To talk about there.
A teaser for more to come.
Yeah, we should do this on a afternoon. So you don't have to get kicked out of your space.
Yeah. Let's say we got about 15 minutes left, so if there's any final topics we want to discuss, good. I'm trying not to talk too much because it turns out with a black screen when I'm talking. So.
Oh no, it's not switching. Oh, is it?
I think it
I'm not
is.
seeing
Yeah.
it switch in. Oh, weird. It looks like YouTube switches, but in the Zoom interface, it doesn't.
Yeah,
Oh, that's annoying.
a little bit.
Can you do a 2-up where it shows both?
Yeah, let me play with that a little bit while you're
Yeah.
working.
Do the gallery view and enable screens without video, I guess. I guess the YouTube connection isn't respecting that setting because you're showing up.
See if that works. But I think your gators are a cool example of a lot of different sculpting techniques and a lot of different, I guess, tool usage and like, you know, with the same basic sculpt underneath, you've got a lot of different variations on that theme, and that's a pretty neat thing to see, like next to each other on the wall.
Yeah.
You want to talk about? You want to talk about some of that?
Yeah. I have showing them now. Wait for them to pop up on the. Okay, yeah, it's like a 10-second delay. Yeah, so the gators I've done in the past. I've done this zombie one here, and for me, this was my first time sculpting like really fine details, and also the gator is an original character, but you know, so I was having fun with this zombie guy. I was kind of doing holiday themes. It started as a party favor I sculpted for my daughter's birthday, and then it just became a thing that I would do every once in a while. My last one was this battle beast style, and so here, you know, the last one I had done was all these very organic shapes. This one was trying to go for the polished machine look, and yeah. So now I'm going to work on that fur. I haven't sculpted fur before on that Viking. Later, I want to do this. This is going to be like a Captain Nemo kind of steampunk with sea creature tentacles coming out of the back. So that's going to be an interesting sculpt there. I think I'll actually apply wax directly to a wire armature so that I maintain the integrity of that. But I'm going to have to think about the right. This is all because it would be an interesting molding exercise in which I'll probably cast the tentacles separate and glue them on in the back. But we'll see. We shall see.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I think that's interesting too. Yeah, using the armature, you'd have to have some sort of armature because those tentacles are so thin that
Yeah,
could break easily. Yeah.
Yeah, I would have to do a cut mold because there's no way I could do a 2-part mold on that and have them survive the first half.
Unless you change their shape, their orientation.
Yeah, if well, even if they were like the process of pulling the clay off of the back of the first half, it's that's enough to put pressure on those parts for them and have them break. That actually happened once, maybe even twice on the number 2 molds. I had to repair his hand halfway through the mold.
I remember that.
Yeah, I was not happy about it. All right, well, I could just go on doing more of this, but I think we've covered a decent amount in this first Wax Lab Guys video. I'm happy that it's finally out of the walled garden of Instagram, and that we can put in a description that you can find in search results. And hopefully one day our videos will be up there with the Scott Hensey interview and the Craftsman's chicken, free range chicken sculpt. But for now, I think we'll just be relegated to all the cosmetic and car wax stuff until we
I was saying we stand out amongst that crowd. So
yeah. If you're looking for us, just put toy wax instead of just wax, because you'll quickly lose your hair or buff out your car.
I do want to thank everybody for coming and watching, and then absolutely give a shout out to Toys Alive and Crumbs Blunt for helping us figure out the Zoom and YouTube connections. Even though my camera is not working right now, that's not his fault. He helped us a ton, so thank you guys for all that. Appreciate it, and all the support. And then once again, I'll just plug one more time. Let us know in the comments what kind of topics you want to see in the future. We are thinking about armature as one. What else did we talk about, Kerf? Wax recipes.
Wax recipes, yeah. Hold on.
Oh, get a little bit of feedback there. Yeah. This one we were just want to talk about introduction and kind of some tools, some basic tools that we use. And then, we'll dive into some more specifics, probably detail work would be fun. Casting, even though we talked a little bit about it today, there's way more to it.
There's a couple more, there are different kinds of casting techniques.
Yep.
We can show in injection and kind of dump mold style.
Yep. And then kind of we can talk about the differences between casting a wax medium and say like resin, because it's different.
We can even show what the I'll have to get a better camera so we can zoom in on some of those chill line details. I have a feeling they're just not going to show up on through Zoom. Yeah.
I'll have to make some mistakes, and then I can show some stuff. But there's plenty more to talk about. So like I said, just throw stuff in the comments if you got ideas for us, please.
Yeah.
And we'll continue doing this. Yeah. So thanks for Kerf. Appreciate your time. And thank you guys for watching.
All right. Cheers, guys.
Cheers.
Bye.